self-esteem, systematic exploring the field of revolution in mental health care, as I say, forms custom movements to resist racist domination, oppression, hooks in, these mental health rejects and analysis, naked capital cooks in, personal pain, preserve people who internalize basic just want to keep like fail to heal, psychological wounds, survival strategies that exactly promote mental illness until further progressive black critical thinkers in, health care seem to have survived, mental standards, self-provoke, people social make such to be don't collect the government resist strategies on concrete, but to create healthy minds, we create the breeding ground for paralysis, like babies, either just post-addictive behavior, growth, addiction, and this reality not content because of genocidal addiction may remain unaddressed, similarly, that children cannot be emotionally equipped by psychological problems of virtual low self-esteem, the internalization rates of African Americans institutionalized progress mental care to redress these issues, psychological movements for African Americans engaging movements for liberation, self-determination, and so quality of our lives, we still live in a white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal society when African Americans collectively never compare the suffering ways and try healing. We have to be able to shame our reality, those out in struggle, more equally can transform society, any racist domination relationship from that, to go positive, taking these steps, solve their musical coalition, unless we go positive, awareness, engagement strategies, empower, enable, solve racial colonies, mentality that promotes mental illness, none of us, and create successful revolution movement, special change if we get from the standpoint of witness as African Americans make mental health care, set vascular officers, displays from society with full back self-determination to require to replace the culture of shame with an ongoing culture of just a man. African American women experience particularly severe extreme racial domination, columns of 1,000 black, when it comes to extreme set of social practices, engagement, domination, conveying sympathy, oppression, racism in everyday situations and social interactions. And subway B is we have an obligation to reject racism in every junction. Part 91 racism besides self limitation, cruelty, just inevitably towards what loss, racism can pretend not to do self made off vision, possibility to refer to self-prison individual decisions, cultures, and destroy the import, self-trust, can be trying to form results century, natural worldwide conflicts, colonies, and multi-built defined aggression between local consumption and environmental destruction may be reaching a point of no return for the sake of golden still to dare not allow to continue to play. And I think that's if I don't understand issues about culture, mental health care by increasing culturally based unity mental health services in the United States will clarify and picture two songs based mental health care is necessary toward invigorating movement critical consciousness, so sound through red, talk about race, and big things, connection, talk about big minds, and things that we can change. The acting in community-based mental health centers, folks can come talk about the problems of mass. So for mental health patterned after AA, where their immediate people can have education, critical consciousness, this work must be community-based and culture-based therapy allows people to develop their own self-esteem and resist racism, greed, and for academic women's relationship and effective decision systems around which they're capable of developing subjective understanding their inner world's external social realities and understanding big changes in social needs, circumstances, so possible. One of the ultimate goals of therapy is incumbent on therapists to be aware of complex racial, gender, and social therapy process, flexible, legacy, race, and sex, acts, and essential aid. To be successful, though one economic strategy possessing very much involved understanding of the client's cultural and social framework. Therapy offers African Americans the opportunity to have a direct, accepted, validate that their understanding, conscious, and conscious effort of running, and negotiating systemic and personal barriers and the life effect of their method of being aware of personally compatible solutions, black feminist analysis, and necessary exposing the intersection of oppressions which affect people of color, columns of 1,000 who with U.S. black feminist, race, class, gender, sexual points, mutual, sexual, oppression, intersectional paradigms, similar to repetition African Americans, such paradigms, just following the second question, also shape the experience of other groups, also shedding light on how domination is organized in terms of matrix of domination describes the overall social conditions, competing capitalism, universality, sexual organizations, prestige, vertical reality, can be especially important to space of domination for society, claims system, race, social class, gender, sexuality, form, mutual sex, social organization, possible basic rethinking of, you can add social institutions, thus by using your sex paradigms, explain both the U.S. matrix domination, black women, traditional cultivating, within black feminist, not, reconceptualize social relations, domination, resistance, these alternative cosmologies have the power to destabilize these notions of identity, columns in 2000s, black experience, now focus on Germany, cosmologies, alternative knowledge, they themselves rarely friend conventional knowledge, much more citing these towns, the alternative cosmology off to the basic process used by the both legitimate knowledge claims to justify the right to the cosmology about what all pride claims are on the nominate model becomes suspect. The cosmology challenge all certified knowledge and open the question of whether what has been taken to be true of the same test, the alternative ways of making true and engage our appeals of prescription against the state, the claims prescription for mental health care for the exclusive prescription is more effective than to stand outside the state allows to engage the state without participating in it. To do in 2001, if convinced of the state that would be radically sympathetic to states via external attitude our views quite different. There are a number of questions regarding that. We cannot have the absolute superiority of states, rather a matter of requiring something from state formally because a certain number of prescribing states concerning the fate of the sand cloud layers in this country first orientation, but if they should vote against state ways today, we will say that single form struggle is rather to create the conditions in which the state is led to change, to repeal the laws that should be appealed to, take the measures that that should be taken, so on. This is what we mean by prescription against states, not state. We participate and say we remain outside the electoral system, but we include the state within our political field to the extent that we have to work more through prescriptions against states than any radical testimony to the state and committee, and ethic of solidarity committee with oppressed people of color, police condition which can say the goals of anti-race society votes in, and white people called black folks fully complete anti-race circles is on board plus political job quality free, social love, community voices, things versus love, they have become to each individual president's home committed living our life for living trouble and white comes to become a reality. Only if every one of us who have created community share how the originalized strategies stand by affirming the difference. The generous spirit of affirmation gives us the courage to challenge one another to work through, saying race and solidarity, trust, ground, those of us who are always anti-racist in the world, which everyone can be a beloved community, anyone can. It makes such a community by truly seek to live in an anti-racist world. Community psychology is most next standpoint versus repression because it doesn't rely on universal system values. rather acknowledges and constantly re-articulates reality. Montenegro found him to reflect the concept of the subject of the meaning fixed needs articulation, not instead of coming something on the lives. The living book, the revolution, national concepts, specific articulation, create horizon and transformation as much as they create the possibility of social practicing, social political, social peace, constituting claims different such as law, community process, and continuous redefinition, re-articulation, addresses the possibility of social transformation, political action, community process without appealing to universal truths or universal subject, political action, dialogue, can be established in the parts of that all voice involved have the same value in terms of social transformation, engage in multi-dimensional interactions, take place when we intervene as external agents in community settings as well as when we merely intervene in our daily lives. From this position, it's possible to start a dialogue to begin to transform fact. The external agent is incorporated and considered as an actor in the network situation engaged, particularly context he or she, would particularly his or her perspective involving other subject decision process to rectify, to get record to establish needs like politically, social psychology, educating touch from social forces, i.e. government institutions potentially related to the community process, foreseeing the possible alliances between certain objective class and opening possible lines of thought, agents, social actors, movements that organize runs political code, possible information, political social spaces beyond community limits, the dialogue, articulation, productive work, transformation, social regulation, perceived as relation, domination, cease to convey critical character, community, social psychology, but from a non-essentialist standpoint, state majority tyranny, threat effect movement from furthering against racial coordination national, no speed, fashion 99, but their facts likely dominate the inside of the global government distribution, subordination to U.S. and market ratios, monster back and policy, active and something most one is social policy bit, but they have been the benefit of from those teachers have been national office alone coming in, poverty and students teaching advanced, being able to focus energy on state political reform, to the extent such self-tendency voters are more defense, state local levels and copy and students must work, levels to companies political fair transaction cost power organizing local forward much greater transaction cost power to central social national level, the possibilities for interest group formation, coalition building improve exponentially, when commit individuals and potential lines convert to a single national legislative off these groups additional strategic advantage in institutional regime, the coalition building accepting for this support them is much better chance of having their voices heard, the coalitions are much less likely to stay low because the legislative not sure institutional to enjoy, the national legislature reinvigorating race categories and essentially resisting domination more cardsy like when you're forced down to the lines of individual extent centralization positivity for challenging quality political prosecution the average to the translation for early personal conflict among those spectrum term political practice so by political lawyers market extractive multi-racial focusing social justice social create social disadvantage rather than the simple way to combat the reinvigorate race and political category just for analysis but for action race is useless claims of material reality which people call less social political power not racist and say collective organization changing political action to racialize just race political status quo and a space for action to change it and where you rejecting policy practice highlight strategic reversibility power relations Campbell 98 the extensive stage relation power that society and significance there have been 9 freedom for possibility folds of because of the same crime set predicate enabling future political enabled can be specified more deeply things from down to background ongoing families and policy frequencies individuals have to the series of counter definitions these things consequences from corruption power freedom balance of the same treatment to strategic reversibility policy terms government tax made into focal points for existing history governments and conduct and so world history extending the counterground state pressure of alongside public collective actions of which have been resisted to the state claims upon the evaluates the therapist interrogates their own experiences relating to oppression and the patient talks about their experiences relating to oppression or Montenegro evidence.
What does that mean? How does that have anything to do with mental health care, though? Like, how is that a form of mental health care when we talk to each other about our forms of oppression?
Our argument is that white supremacy creates mental illness. It's the cause of mental illness that Black American and other minorities are.
Wait, white supremacy?
Well, our argument is also that you can get treatment for depression, but the treatment has cultural aspects to it.
Dude, we only treat.
So how does sharing like your different like patterns of domination?
You know psychotherapy.
Of
It's
mental
when you
health
talk
care.
about. Yes.
Okay, so all that's necessary to solve your affirmative is that people talk to each other about what's happening to them.
Incorrect. What's necessary is exactly what we said. Let me see. I can say it again.
No. If just people talk to each other about their different histories of subjugation in a cultural context, does that solve your affirmative?
No.
Why not? What doesn't it solve?
It doesn't solve our cash and evidence, which indicates that a national signal is key.
It also
What's the
doesn't solve-
cash and evidence? I mean, where is this?
There's a more important argument that it doesn't
What's the
solve.
warrant why a national signal is key?
Because there's infrastructure in the national level that allows movements to coalesce more effectively. There's less opposition on the national level.
Okay, will you specify your agent?
Say the United States program. Do you think we're going to specify?
I'm just wondering if you're... Okay, you're not going to specify your agent. Sweet. Okay, what's the warrant why national is key again?
Lots of warrants. One of them is historically minorities have been discriminated against in the states, even after states pass laws.
Okay, that's fine. Those aren't warrants why the federal government taking action over the plan is critical, right? So all that's necessary to solve your affirmative is that people talk to each other. Let's go back to that question.
It also has to
What?
take place in the context of mental health care.
Why? What's the one?
Our inherency evidence indicates that there's
There needs to be a revolutionary mental health movement.
What's the one? Why it has to be mental health?
The point is that because of the impact of white supremacy on minority communities in this country, there is a lot of internalized self-esteem problems of people who feel less,
Self-esteem problems? What does self-esteem have to do with mental illness?
It's the same thing as like depression, dude. Our movement would not get off the ground if people are too depressed to go out there.
I mean,
and
if you're
protest.
gonna go for tea, dude, you should read the first piece of evidence I read.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just wondering why these discussions have to be centered around mental health.
Because self-esteem problems are the root cause.
Self-esteem
of
is a
people
mental
that-
illness, though.
When people are depressed,
when people are
that's a mental
depressed,
illness.
that's a mental illness.
Yes.
And when they don't have
TSD.
self-esteem, that's a mental illness.
Our argument is that when people who are mentally ill go to culturally based mental health care, they can reinvigorate their self-esteem and enable them to form alliances to combat racism.
You want crap?
And you didn't ask about a framework, which was a mistake.
Which one's your water?
Do you want some water early?
Can we get that timer that you ordered back?
Yeah, really.
Oh, wait, yeah, you left it up there. My bad.
Ready?
And then you roll me up there.
It's 4 off.
Fourth House gave us confirmed to specify the rage of beats, what issue one specification critical negative ground principle running policies as 80 counterpoints by the age of 60 that also running to the songs young challenging the implementation plan to this round to repel the topics already true about negative already and things ever very strong as possible so clearly overcoming the past songs by 3 age specification is good to policy with key to policy with relation to essential education for the majority number order the 1 seat all in 2 seats specify laws of pick on Asian we can't enter which is unfair and next office top quality local service age duration will apply those first population which parental care excludes individual streaming services public health sector projects the term level of the first activity at population level and improving health pregnancies the common include services the part of 101 treatment services, probably personnel services, and be logical plans of main treatment services. There are number 101 basis amendments of made population-based parentheses treatment for 1. Let me see affirmative towards health increase access to any kind of treatment for alcohol abuse, secondary risk technician, between ground. 4. The affirmative defend population-based prevention programs, because that's made properly warning service justified for care. 4. Individuals which are predictable, no less desensitizing to it. 4. Voting, locality, externality, or critical for an educational base. Next stop is politics. And one pass now, but it's only few shy that's inside on the useful 14. The Senator McCurry County said he hopes to use a budget resolution open the Anwar. The Biological Party, the resolution of the now because whatever got only 51 votes rather than 60, she already has 49 solid which Democrats are voting against Anwar, like Senators Cleveland and Carnahan, who were defeating the Bible replaced by Republican supporters of Anwar, according to Murkowski. Dan Nichols committed passing proposal of the West Commission is the one commission who we need support right now. And we had that support and after at some point, because after a lot of controversy, we're going to embrace for minority policies key to success of the GOP. That's U.S. News and World Report in 2002. Senate Majority Leader says actually much more than the bill should disavow West Center law, which he sure wants to confront the Republican Party record on race and embrace policies for gender and healing first. Many believe may just be the man for jobs as black lives matter to move away from Jesse Helms' model of as he gets philosophical conservative, but on this issue, make it wrong and say, look among middle class blacks and conservative blacks, whether that second looks transitive votes and critical features of the GOP don't understand that better than George W. and Bush's alien moderates with this conservative agenda must return to moderate healthcare agenda gain capitalist hotline in 2003. Bush began to opposite return to appeal such to appeal of voters 7 years over to focus on healthcare and reminders of the compassion conservative agenda. These words seem to yield results, but in the lead up to the 2004 campaign, the coaching has been all faltering. Already says that the plan for reaching out to moderates is teetering. He's putting more attention to his based around on policies that might appeal traditional Democrats when you're 50 edition. You everyone you can pee away counts and. Anwar drilling destroys global protection of species. That's our Tribune in 2002. Anwar's trying to place where prison place the whole thing migratory versus a large care word. It makes us the dollars all that and makes actually good when colleagues won't even dare boost miles to the ESP from this world, but next about the other encourage to imitate them after all most nations are much more than the United States. So if yes, we can't afford to protect the Anwar, how African nations like Hassan, Brazil, Vietnam, be trying to protect their own special places and issue species. Extinction risk of human extinction. That's Maj in 94. As cardiovascular has progressed, while world's biological diversity generally the decrease of trend occurs within ecosystems by reducing the number of species and within species by reducing the number of individuals. Biologically, for say, ecosystems more stable, less diverse, more complex, ecosystems more central, restrained. By causing widespread extinction, the biological stability increase, so does the risk of ecosystem failure of animal or plant ecosystem with all dimly. Receiving required effort to actually cause total ecosystem collapse and human extinction. Human extinction needs to do with the extinction could increase the risk of disaster. It's off the counterplay. The United States Federal Government actually increase public service by increasing culture-based community health services. The USBs will be for discussing of a lack of self-esteem or other health issues.
Subpoint A, the counterpoint could be say one insulting counterpoint because the next is substance mandates, but the nurse class mental or advocate resolution could theoretically legitimate it could be off the level of discussion flaming of the plan. That means there should involve the counter for all aspects of the actually shifted the resolution focus to plan focus, and how the action should be next after the reason fair for the they just prevent defend both the terms of the plan, the reason why the plan is endorsement resolution is predictable, and the core topic for focus on discussion actually keep debate range which is critical education, law debate focus on mental health, parliamentary resolution, which is good. Or making include super arguments like policy sense, take schools arguments like state counterpoints, otherwise dominate the year, five education focus on terms of resolution more important, and very self-assessment and fair second, the first debate participation will become fully informed on the topic of counterpoint leads to go by best supporting affirmative to defend all terms of resolution, and reasons that benefit one, the affirmative countries can push the mental health and conference mental influence discourse, the actually the resolution and conference apply the actual existing reflecting actual behavior, playing against the government power to define political problem mental decide what label constitutes and prize conclusions, or those people label the prosecutor versus institutional legitimacy of the process defining the behavior to get that social control. That's copyright name. The way social control power goes back into authority to define certain behaviors, where certain things right to debate, reside in law, but it's up through the subject force, takes on people advantage to find problems against what type of problem it is, and what they get, what you've done right there. Social control gives you power to have really look at definition of the world, realize what the peer spirit practice, and such definitions reflect receive wide social force. This power of authority that right consider once you get rid of the attack the disorder, may become best dominant institution, and when the institution definition becomes dominated and accepted, and it's able to find the territories or the institution practice when government acting and for dealing power or the stewards of social control, and two, the labels of defines the categories of mental illness are socially constructed labels just review radical constitutes and aiming mental brings life as cost growth, and the Q in 2002. Earliest position of one that assumes the order simply represent variable labels, obviously which refer to postmodern hard to critical literacy, naive, simplistic, and ground epistemology, privilege, language is seen as a constituent rather than revealed reality. Language affects what we do and what we don't know is what we do and don't experience, and then gives meaning to the reason life even is not real, whether labor or rather peers and constitutes our language. It's produced through a biased psychiatric discourse and through legislative judicial mandates that acting on label behaviors are neatly visible, plans to action legitimize. These labels throughout society is Conrad Nagin, most common areas, conflict, legislative courtrooms, legislative hold hearings on even severe arguments from designation champions and opponents of victory here. For the medical designation means pastors, laws, word of the medical viewpoint, granting medical and official social control, judicial suspension, Supreme Court, made from dominance and designation of one over the other, and legitimize this designation, and see the act labeling, replication, one language, mental health creates power to find approach treatments and education. A cause of behavior creates images for a cure without questioning the construction label, history proves the methodology, and positioning the affirmative treatment outcome over the needs of the individual with disaster effects as Zaz in 94. The fetal psychiatric force inherently psychiatric recount language mental makes search for the ideology feeded is used to lose comes to try to constantly prove false language, also makes search for treatment of a strategy which lose government some fashionable cure, only prove worthless or harmful language mental makes search for problems and restore the mental patient which lose government the private madhouse, the mental health hospital, the community mental health center, each cell is most humane therapy with effects setting for the purpose only to be discredited as inappropriate and harmful, and two, the employment label consulting with self and crossing individual condition acting in a way that fulfill the label's requirements, car gender paraphrase, Roseanne says psychiatric label as life and influence of his own once a person to inform the patient against schizophrenic expectations that will continue to be schizophrenic diagnosed as all this self-limiting prophecy, eventually the patient accepts that it and behaves accordingly, and 3. Labeling increased pressure for more cultural treatments that destroy individual autonomy, dehumanizing people, even though the plan might make good intention of the power of the institutions is fine upon acting on labels, creating conditions for coercive medicalization. Card gender paraphrase, man 98, does the use of menstruating metaphors, especially camouflage uses of metaphors towards humankind, like create freedom of autonomy, psychiatrists present themselves to scientists exclusion denied. The right of autonomy, those who may choose to find and control this role, psychiatric definitions, as well as physical police among them, get power to make people and incarcerate them, and there may be also drug other forms of dehumanization, and foreign label mentals, reduce the behavior of disease and rob ability to confront evil, deploying medical vocabulary, residents of challenging their social institutions that makes atrocities in our rules. Card like this card gender preparation, Conrad and 80. Medicalization could reason exhaustion, concepts of evil in our society. Medicalization tries to mental people being confronted as evil. Medical definitions of demons serve to exclude evil from our tender motives of evil is desperate evil conflicts for prevail. Sickness gives a vocabulary motive until the obliterate of evil tend to the greatest master trying to modern she and some and reasonable destruction of the Jews of personal pathological condition to many of them physical sick, but the first is horror of all lots of product of individual pathological presence seeing and confronting inhumanity. There's little giving into idolatry such by medical vocabulary motives only traditional comprehending human element, the decision we make, the social record we create, the actions we take, and 5. The counterpoint solved by disavowing notion of mental health arguments, not that counter concepts as unhappiness or social behavior no interest, but these are basic forms of living, not mental illnesses. There's no such thing as mental health. And as such, the concept of mental health care is impossible, but negative direct resolution of the mental health that endorses Carr's gender paraphrase Zaz in 83. Why sure the mental illness with I'm not saying the practical person happiness on the social behavior diagnosis. I'm saying that we categorize some disease at our own peril. We call people physically ill when their body functions violate certain anatomical norms. And we call mental people mentally when their personal violate certain ethical, political, social norms. The myth of my nose. Hey, purchase believe in psychological, worldly, social, and course would be harmonious, satisfying, and certain basis of life, or not disrupting influence of mental influence of universe type human happiness is one example of which plans you are based on demons, which is fate or mental illness. We know that we can find exercise just like here. We do have problems of living, whether these are biological, economic, political, social, psychological. The mental illness, the brain whose function is disguised and thus render more powerful. The bitter pill, moral complex in human relations.
Let's talk about the CPI evidence you read on the NR today. Who wrote this card?
What?
Who wrote the CPI evidence?
I didn't read that card anyway, so it's sort of irrelevant.
Oh, you didn't read that card? Well, the card above it says that every vote Bush can peel away counts for Where's the evidence that says Bush will be able to peel away from?
Talks about how he's alienated moderates, conservative generally.
Yes,
There's a specific
the next thing
argument in
you
your
need to
case that
explain,
talks
I
about how
understand
the issues like the plan would be important to get moderates back on the side.
Where does that evidence talk about issues relating to each other? Why would the plan affect the ANWR vote? Why would people who
says
oppose
he
the
alienated moderates
I
and that he
understand
has
that,
to
but
go
why-
back to and get capital by appealing to them, right?
Where
An
do you read
argument
any
that-
internal link evidence that says capital built on one issue affects another issue? Why would the moderates who oppose ANWR because it destroys the environment and they don't deem it as necessary
You can
ever
make those
vote for
arguments.
Well, can you answer it? I mean,
No, just like, you were a little bitching in the cross.
all right, fine.
I'll get the same
What's the status of the matter?
What's the status of the car?
That's disposition.
What's that mean? Like everything other than this with that?
Sure.
All right. So is your argument that there's no impact on people's minds due to white supremacy?
Argument is that we shouldn't call that a mental illness. Even if there's an impact on the mind, that doesn't make it a mental illness.
So what do you do about it?
What do you mean, what do you do about it?
Well, how does your counterplan
Counterplan
like
does.
your counterplan establishes community health care centers. So they're going to talk about how like
It doesn't
they
establish
grow
the centers, it establishes the services, just like you said.
Services. Yeah, dude, you're right.
That's
I was
right.
I was a jerk. But do they just talk about how like they just broke their arm the other day or what?
We can talk about things like their problems with self-esteem or any other.
Why? What is self-esteem?
Our argument
Why
is just that the
different
label
from
of the
mental
mental illness or the label of being mentally ill is bad. They can still talk about the same
Your
concerns
evidence
or
is,
things.
are you saying your evidence is so distinct to say word mental illness equals
Yeah, it
bad?
talks
Any
about
other
it
words
says
to
the
describe-
label of mental illness. That's what all of the cards talk
Okay,
about.
so why is the label bad?
Why is the label bad? It gives a couple
Is
examples.
it
Of
overused? I mean,
What do you mean? It's not that it's
Why
over.
is it
Why
bad?
would it being overused mean that it's a
well, I
bad
don't
word?
understand the word and why self-esteem is
It's
distinct.
inherently used to otherize people, make them seem different than you, and it's used to.
Is there a specific link?
Is there a specific link? Yeah, use the word mentally ill.
Okay, and why does that mean we inherently otherize people?
Well, like
I
the
wanna see
cross-section
if
of the
this
one I see would be a great example of a link where you characterize things like feeling bad about yourself and losses of self-esteem as a mental illness. I think that's a pretty good link for
stands. Okay, if you read any evidence indicates white supremacy does not cause mental illness.
We don't think the SAS evidence says there's nothing such thing as mental illness.
Yeah, we-
So what is it?
There are things that
What
you
is it?
describe as mental illness.
What is it?
There are things that unhappiness. Exactly.
How would you describe
And
it?
unhappiness is unhappiness.
like
You don't have to go to the second step to call it a mental illness.
What's
That's
the
all it is.
difference?
The argument is that the label itself is bad. You're just repeating
Why is
yourself
it
over and
bad?
over. Okay, well, do you want me to go back into this again?
Is it because we categorize people as mentally ill? Why don't you categorize people as
If
unhappy?
we don't use that label and don't endorse that label and say we're going to reject it. It's pretty simple.
Amendment.
Right. The ASPEC, the Public Health Services, the DISED, and the counterplan. The counterplan and the K are the same as they were written.
Specification, no resolution basis, random definition, every resolution gives it head space to federal government and to counter-protection. We can only specify the United States federal government in the context of better ground and particularly because concession based intention ground of ground and does read not specify better protection of education because they have to resource or no means is specified as in counter-protection will defend Congress or agent against their dissents. Most of the U.S. federal government gets counter agent capital. We don't think they have a right to themselves or offer to the voice hours that ASPEC was to the negative leadership out of the argument. Every turn to avoid negative arguments and hyperclassification destroys ground. They never be every case with dissent and they don't overspecify every word of the context. That's worse for education ground. The negative lose all of topic knowledge and preparation. ASPEC requires agents for legitimate just not true benefits or opportunities. Strategy for us to ourselves with checks. After we recommend for one see time to get fucking and get counted. Often about this plan, they encourage big context because out of picture jacks all capital this correctly use civil rights topic proves that ASPEC produces generic rates and there's no ground nothing. So the policies as agent pictures have no right to prove they can still get the core of their strategy and will so solve the means to ensure the best implementation mechanism possible. There are more evidence is unqualified and anecdotal to refer to our specific solvency of public health services. One, we need community mental health services for prevention of mental health problems. If you clarification delay public health services for delivery of healthcare by public departments. Des Moines Rosemont 2002. The delivery of healthcare by public health departments as safety net providers. We best limit their interpretation massively over the resolution of prevention services, mental health care, for crisis and treatment care, prevention for interpretation keep negative ground and education predictability. And see no case means interpretation. You can't have prevention services for mental health care. You have to have treatment. There's no way to prevent someone from being mentally ill. Counter-interpretation mental health care is treatment. This is how Calgary Regional Health Authority to work on preventive diagnostic and treatment services and variety of community and hospital space settings to allow people to maintain a healthy and state of emotional well-being. These may include emotional support, introspective problem-solving assistance, and informal living. We don't have guys that are certain health centers on massive amounts of education campaigns. The worst everything can be treated, so it improves our transportation that you can affirmative, and it's better for ground all dissent, particularly since the actual provision of treatment and to get better ground for spending dissent to go and more evidence. Lincoln et al. In 2000, mental health care to provide health and service departments and primary care, specialized care, social services corporation, and other agencies and disability checks. Even our transportation like we spend up with our transportation is right to result of the predictability ground from conditions not on measure on top county where the best is going to get in this violation and no for potential abuse. Where like this evident link to most looking interpretation is arbitrary, just as counter interpretation only our affirmative potential abuse is not abuse. Jurisdiction proves the judge can evaluate. Dissent. Bush arguments links on unique. Bush's attempt to educate minority voters now began a new service in 2003. Bush voters opinion account of the president forefront of the efforts to gain my favor among minorities. What's going on in the party right now is working for minds of black Americans. The administration is taking the right steps to reach out to black Americans who are part of the old guard. Bush publicly announced last comments before a black audience in Philadelphia and case outweighs the lay magnitude of our evidence indicates that environmental destruction and massive oppression and results of racism. Additionally, our Hooks evidence indicates that people are hugely oppressed by the racist system. Additionally, our impacts are systemic. They're going on in status quo. White supremacy is prevalent throughout American society, and issues that need to be dealt with. Additionally, our framework indicates you should err affirmative regardless of dissent. Our Hooks evidence indicates that evaluating the around from the standpoint of the press is more beneficial because we can form collective movements for social resistance and non-unique in term racism of the agenda for Democrats, and there's only risk that GOP will backlash because if you're a race-based issue in Congress, National Review in 2003, the party's not repeating our racial issues, Bush was saying, who sent a signal why we are nominating Pickering, a lot of controversy to consume capital in December, but weeks about that, and we think about a lot of affairs we can be talking about because some Republicans, swing voters are not going to favor Bush and hostile minorities, a lot of affairs, some temporary damage to our party, some Republican media tend to wait for Democrats post-election, not that Bush is left in the yes, what could you be mental assault by a Republican congressman balking the president's civilian tax not worried about the politics of Medicaid, these are Bush's problems, and the return Pickering nomination proves Bush will spend political capital to vote for This is Scripps Howard News Service in 2003, the White House has done with the Senate authority nomination, federal circuit district judge Pickering, who minister from committee rejected the bold in your face of the suggestion for Democrats, and the president's plan well, even though Senate Republicans only one vote majority, the Republicans are scrambling to rebuild the charge of parties so well and tolerant racism. Some Bush advisors for the Capitol White House against Congress renominating Pickering, but the president clearly felt this was worth expending into Washington and buzzword his political capital. The Senate looks like it's in for rankers, rockets, and partisan session, and the Pickering nomination for Bush is still following the GOP Southern strategy of reporting racist policies, same party behavior at the time in 2003. The president's eyes and discarded the Southern strategy. The last comes from 7% the president against the rights of many Republican leaders. National leaders nominated Pickering, the nominating Pickering, the White House opens the question that lies for resident by helping to remove Latin Senate Republican leader, but now it's not safely going to the exact the president has gone out of his way to renominate a judge's record as retrograde as lots, and no impact to the animal regime change to the rack will release a flood of cheap oil companies will decide that animal development isn't economically viable. Majority in 2003, Iraq may be able to find 8 years ago, Iraq becomes second Saudi Arabia. Evidence indicates the rise of 3 years to 4% of world oil supply, which price the lowest of decades, and increase the development of aggressive oil resources, including costly large unneeded. According to the United States Geological Survey, outquoted estimate animal supply account for the recovery 3.2 billion barrels of oil, so the price of $24 available to $15 available recoverable amount falls to zero, even if Congress invites zero. The oil and gas producers don't plan when opposed to on board the Iraq probably got the last economics to tell you there's little incentive to do so. Counterplan. First argument crossed by the Hooks evidence 1AC. This is absolutely phenomenal evidence. It indicates that escalating the politics of mental health is necessary in order to vitalize coalitions that are based off of healthy self-esteem. People in the status quo are depressed and are afraid of mental health care movements because of the stigma that has been associated with them, and allowing to move a coalition within the framework of mental health is necessary to resist racism. Across Montenegro evidence, we're not necessarily stigmatizing or normalizing these individuals inside of community centers that uniquely key to formulating individuals' own identity and permutation to both. And none of their arguments assume community care. All evidence assumes institutionalized care of the former era when individuals were locked up in institutions. It's not the same thing that what was saying from Montenegro evidence. And Shah's argument is repugnant. People are experiencing depression and other mental disorders because of the systemic impacts of things like racism and other societal forces. We need to be able to resist those by giving them strategies for resistance that only can happen within the framework of mental health care. That's our 1AC Hooks evidence. And picks are bad. That's on the A spectrum. Movements against institutionalization have created immense guilt in society. The horrors of sound and shame is denied, reflective unconsciousness of public violence to the mentally ill. An affirmation of mental health care is necessary to eliminate the genocidal mentality. Sedgwick and 82. New institutions continuing care must replace the horrors of the silent and direct states from silent conditions to produce and make guilt and collective unconscious for public awareness. Most effective means coping the denial or refusal of the existence of problem triggering the shame and horror. The repression of the silent has a habit of returning the ancestral spectre stocks memory and sensibility once the race or lose by nuclear transforming experience push back to logic functioning the netherworld. Once we face these demanding goals on to overturn the act liberation finalized system, they will drag us up with them into new gulags, new enslavement, new worlds of madness, new control, new holocaust, and simply combating the effects of racism through anti-discrimination and other sorts of things are not enough. We must pursue mental health in order to create self-esteem and political resistance. This is Hooks in 2002 as Black folks gain a measure of to equal access to money, and consumers and collective concern for anti-racist struggle to diminish all discussions of mental health for science material advancements for deemed outstanding agenda, even though issues of self-esteem were addressed, but focus on the struggle with, we continue to vote that we have triumphed over suffering, rather than acknowledging that any other group of people who were sort of victims of genocide Holocaust. On questioning exploitation, we have our stories about wounds that are not healing, confronting chronic emotional pain and backlash to territory and political resistance, which now implore the new revolutionary frontier of mental health to make triumph from well-being in order for all black people in Canada land. Hence, all the cases, no reason why the green evidence indicates that without providing therapy, they're not going to be able to locate their cultural context. Additionally, in this specific instance, the labels of mental illness will be necessary to make an effective advance in social justice. Such justice is centric. In 72, nothing markets confirms the technologized images, and we've not even technologized illness beyond the point which we have helped produce my case points to with the politicalization of mental goals without concept of mental illness. We shall be able to make demands on all sorts of facilities labeling theories are committing a sociological irresentism, but it's offensive psychiatric imperialism, the passivity, is highly dangerous, the amount of public money available for investment by health services, so grossly inadequate, labels not sociology, not tonight. The priority of research allocation for public psychiatric services, public psychiatry to also become unpopular general public systems, middle class forms, the great reservoir candidates from the hospital pressure groups get elected, the unpopular public health psychiatry support factor which prevents crystallization of vocals from a lot of situations against facilities. Mental health is a critical concept of research. There's some that much harder for profit campaigns for mental health services, mental health, the concept of development, enable and stream engagement for no public action standards that will lead their hands to try to send the way to be taken seriously. The post show is about the battle. It's in the battle on the right side of the kind of plan. Links to the bush, they read all they read is race links in the one and see, and mental health care is necessary to create resistance movements and self-esteem. It's hooking them to the critical influence of the historically by the blacks with those creative subcultural resistance was diminished. The demand of black and masses with black folks who passively accept the values of white supremacy, capitalist patriarchy, they replace national relationships with themselves, acting as black folks. We have the practice of access to various progressive that with enables very healthy self-esteem, liberation, and reason why they should self-esteem to be an unimportant reaction to the problems facing black American. Nevertheless, all without widespread effort to establish mental health care communities where folks can learn to have healthy self-esteem and conditionality is a voting issue. It's a it's a moving target. If we don't have a table vote to compare the fight to we are, can make it a stop with these happenings. Engaging and encourage our responsibility to just make models that it's aggressive and it's just like from a world destroys wasting of time and strategy because I spend half my time reading answers with a conventional way.
Hey, can I get that 1AC evidence, that hook evidence?
Yeah. And then you took the 1AC.
What?
Yeah, he just...
It's the first part in the 1AC. It's the first part in the 1AC. It's 3 pages long.
Alright, sweet. Oh, that's a hook. Oh, yeah, like bell hooks. I get it.
Yes. Everything's right there. So. I mean, nothing's over here, so everything's over there. That's on your side.
Yeah. Can you just give me the first part of the 1AC?
First card. Can you show me which card is
Yeah,
the first part of the 1AC?
Yes. Here's the card of it. I don't know what the first page is. Yeah. All right.
Thanks.
Alright. When you're on A-Spec, you make a bunch of arguments. You're saying you're going to defend Congress as your agent now?
One of our counter-interpretations is that if you want, we will defend the Congress as our agent against your disadvantages so you can get linked to politics. We do not think you have a right to agent counterplans, however. So we will defend the United States.
It's like,
But in the world of an agent, we still would not be able to run an agent counterplans to that.
No, we do not think you have
So
the right to
what's your
agent
other
counterplans.
counter-interpretation?
There was a couple.
Okay, so what are all of them?
the F can never specify.
There was one counter-interpretation that says the app is not allowed to specify beyond the United States federal government, and that's better because there's a couple reasons. So you get to, it means the negative gets to research what normal means is, and it means we can't...
Negative has to... So what happens in a world of a new affirmative?
Well, I don't know.
How do you research what
This
the
is in
normal
the topic
means in literature of affirmative?
The other reason for why that's good
You're not
is
answering my question.
What?
How do you research normal means in the world of a new affirmative?
You should
I mean,
know.
it's no
I should
different than
know.
researching normal means in the world of an old affirmative. I don't understand the difference.
No, like an affirmative that no one's ever heard before. How do you
Community
research
mental
it?
health centers that are culturally based, that doesn't sound so, like, unpredictable.
Then
Like, for
normal
example, you could say that there are certain boards under the executive agency that have...
We are
We're
not
not
allowed to
saying
say
that.
that.
All right,
Is our
yeah, that's fine,
interpretation,
that's
because
fine.
we're not allowed to
Where's
specify.
block?
I don't know. You probably took it. But I mean, I don't have it. The other reason for why that's good is because it means we can't specify out of your disadvantages. We have to stick to the United States federal government, which means you get things like the politics discount.
Right, but we still don't get any agent counterpoints.
We think those are bad.
All right, is there any other counter-interpretations?
I don't know. I mean,
All right, you can't
took
find your block.
You took the block because it's not here.
Aleem, it's definitely there.
Where? Do you have it?
It's not in this pile, so you took it. It's not over here.
Yeah, I took it. Are you looking for A-Spec? Yeah, just put it somewhere around here.
It's probably under that T block.
Yeah, it's right here, dude. It's right here. Good.
Are there any other counter-interpretations?
There is not. No.
On
6:15 now.
Order is the counter plan
Did you say politics or not?
with an overview on top.
There's an overview.
Yeah.
Is it long?
It's pretty long. Yeah. It's intense. It's intense. This is mine, right?
Yep. Wait, before you start, can I have the one I see that?
It's not really in order, but
It doesn't matter.
Just give us back everything you can.
I think this most of the stories right there. Second. I'm gonna move this over because there's like no light here.
Okay. You ready?
You all set?
Yeah.
Arguments as a category of mental illness or social constructive frequencies, conditions are based upon medical fact, and depending on the social context, time the identification of conditions, mental illness propagates, history tries to set medical progression as committed on individuals, identical forms, social norms, history of traits. Examples of the vividly homosexuality used to be considered mental illness before the 70s. It was unacceptable social practice, discrimination against a need, rationality in the 1800s, psychiatrists labeled runaway slaves as suffering, or a condition known as rapine as explained in the paper, rationalizing institutional slavery, and just like George Stream, the affirmative replicates his living, and they may say that they're acting in the interest of the patient, but one sees outside, and Manhattan says this rationale has been used historically to justify the application of every single barbaric crime used against people labeled as mentally that's based upon a logic that such people are distinguishingly impaired to act. They went back between psychosis and arrest, sometime mastery of the scope of living privileges, the church of the pure for behavior, so that autonomy of the individual rapine and also becoming the ultimate and intervention which makes possible subhuman dream. That's my bird. And that's an 83 struggle for human liberty, dignity, to having wage on makes friends, and many different ways is currently popular humans and still should champion the rights of mental health and the rights of victim speech from the wrong human trying to articulate this great mistake which rejects those who subjecting the rights of the mental health, we should protect the rights of people being correctly categorized mental health against their will. Additionally, or in fact, that's the person that waits case, even if we lost the camera and one, they can see that discourse of representations are more important than false effects. Our cost-driven Conrad says that these shapes, social actions, and bad behavior, and change our daily interactions, instructions, and mental illness have tangible effects on people's lives, whereas the advocacy of drinking policies, so thus informing against the affirmative the access to levels of power. The Christian terms case supplements are Rosenhan says the label street, a supplementing prophecy that increase the behavior that they're designed to correct supplement B, or as Asman says, the historical versus psychiatric research that has been totally effective. The argument about specific solvency where the same claims are used to justify electric shock and modernization of the benefit. Historical versus is more important because it allows us to escape social context, where placing and look at several practices in their methodology, and validate use of direct upon methodology that recommends action against interactions shows direction. Additionally, the fact that the harms our self-willing and destroys your movements comes because if these people are seen as mentally ill and mentally deviant, then they won't be persuasive when they try to make any when they try to lobby for social change. And look, all of their hoax evidence is non-responsive whatsoever. You just look at their cards and they just circle the words mental health. However, that's not what the author is trying to say. The author is not trying to say at all that mental health is a critical concept or a movement to lobby around. The author is just actually criticizing mental health, saying that the status quo model of mental health is bad. It doesn't say the alternative to mobilize movements or to rally support must be based on mental health. There's no offense on why the label itself of mental health is critical. We do functionally the exact same. We functionally essentially do the exact same thing in spine. However, we don't advocate the labels that the person uses when see it. Just says the reference just says addressing the emotional health is critical. That without emotional health, the people won't be able to solve it. Our accountable and solve for the emotional health. And next term, they're Montague syndicate. They say it says they're not stigmatized. However, or when it's counter indicates that the power to find means that these people will inevitably be stigmatized when they're seen as mentally unhealthy. If someone is feeling depressed or has lack of self-esteem, they're being categorized as being mentally unhealthy, which is our link argument. Additionally, they say the reputation. However,
One, this is some implementation. Our counterplan can be with the affirmative discourse and endorsement of the term as follows. The counterplan tells those terms we may do the entire plan. We don't need to endorse this for the resolution, which is basically burden. Additionally, some implementations are running issues supplementing makes the affirmative accuracy inventory and no counterplan will repeat with the plan and endorsement of the resolution are critical to make predictability and fair playing field. Supplement stores accuracy skills even they can be inconsistent means that their criticism has low likelihood of ever being unproductive or rewarded and then negative or consistency. Actually, scratch that argument. Additionally, the resolution is a legitimate source of counterplan competition supplement. It's for the affirmative these terms are finding there are a limited number of words that all have to do is define mental health, which is predictable. So it doesn't justify having testing or counter warrants or arguments that the affirmative depend on mental health policies. Instead, this policy has to be defense of all terms of the resolution, so it's still predictable for them. Additionally, this discursive framework affects policy limitation. That's the one counter items. It means that both it's impossible because they have radically different policy effects or affirmative endorsement mental health creates a more diverse policy than the rest. By the permutation to solve discursive artifacts and go away. What's under the impact label still shows how we think the effects on the behavior of soft summons. That's our soft summons 6. They have to directly label mental health. They're still reading and saying evidence to endorse that concept. Next argument, they say that the links to the public organs it's about the institution, however, extent or man evidence indicates that even if the plan itself is a good idea, it still justifies worse atrocities and makes those other worst atrocities possible. There are hoax evidence indicates that these atrocities are really possible because them just getting up here and reading the plain text or passing this type of legislation within the USFG won't be able to solve all of racism, which means that worse forms are still possible in these people. Next argument, they say these as arguments are morally repugnant. However, the alternative solves this because the alternative does things for people who are suffering the status quo argument simply that the label of mental illness itself is a bad idea. Next argument, they say playing food counterplans. However, picks are important to determine the best false options to support for education. To not conduct such we do the entire plan, but we frame it in different terms. We don't use it to build resolution 3 side by justifies the affirming against issues that are ground. They have near for time the first last speech and the benefit of the song therapy. Additionally, to affirmative 4 private topics of products there or under the topic based and then each generic tries in order to have it changed. It's critical fairness 5 items check to be from an advantage based on the term mental health 6 is predictable. The mental health care support concept and the resolution affirms the fact that one of the biggest issues in literature. Some things are critical posts in the ban on issues, but otherwise we consider trivial. This is the only way we can talk about important real world impacts and get excluded by asinine nuclear war impacts. 8 is still very further from supplementing. All they have to do is defend the act there. All they have to do is defend the label, which we're seeing adamantly offensive across 620 vermin mandated by the resolution and supplementing and also create discursive advantages. Or for instance, use policy 9.14 on discursive differences. Policy is critically important in their place. And approaches to himself follow the way which purposes be out over discourse accuracy and does apply now. And the next term they say the statute of governments. However, the alternative solves their statute of governments. Their statute of governments doesn't indicate the demand around the concept of mental health is critical. It just says doing something for people who are institutionalized is critical. Additionally, rejecting mental illness will solve that statute. We will probably advocate that we reject the concept of mental illness and mental health not act within those frameworks. So the counterplan solves all their officer arguments. Next term they extend they read the Hook's evidence to talk about self-esteem as critical. Mobilized movements, however, I'll already answer the Hook's evidence above. This is essentially saying the same thing. They just circle the words mental health. However, our argument is that we're criticizing Hook's characterization of self-esteem and mental health in the same context. So the only thing that Hook says is necessary to solve is where you address self-esteem and have the ability, to reconcile what's been done to these people in the past. Next argument to say that we don't solve anything because we don't do any cultural context. However, you can read our counterplan text says that we stop services for things like self-esteem problems or any of the problems that people are going through in their daily life. That's just our argument that things that they're calling mental illnesses are just problems with living. Something like being unhappy is not a mental illness per se. It's just a problem with living, and we stop services for them and go and talk about those. Next argument, they say that they say the idea of mental health is critical for advance. However, this argument is doesn't actually say that you have to mobilize around the idea of mental health. It just says that you have to be opposed to mental health. It's talking about institutions. Being opposed to institutions is critical. How we have to advocate community-based care. How we have to advocate community-based care. That's what our counterplan does. None of these arguments are responsive whatsoever. Next time they say that, they say the counterplan links Bush, that's irrelevant. Next time they say that mental health care is critical to movement. I've already answered the Hook's evidence above. Actually, Elaine, you can give me the dispo block. Last time they say dispositionality, however, one rigorous policy testing, disability such as the affirmative of multiple approaches, which pipelines education truth seeking requires the side to stop affairs. Further to the issues around ground, absent dispositionality, negative has no chance for all arguments of disposition. The affirmative as adopting structure and P disadvantage, there's no reason directed that just because it's counterplan for itself for affirmative, supplying the illustration of the counterplan, so you can put the options better for affirmative ground, they can make the rest of the ones go away, so we need permutations or worse, dispositionally. This is a reciprocal, the affirmative can make multiple conditional permutations that are harder for us to answer. 5 counter standards, they must extend every single argument to AC or the elusive ring issue because of her time allocation. We have to answer all 6 minute time allowance for the affirmative, still have 8 minutes to answer all for arguments either way. Some bank checks to be sent upon checks because they don't know how to manage their time effectively. 8 contradictions are a voting issue. They get just concede one of them on seconds, but the rest of them 9 consistency and some important debates about education, improving kind of skills. We switch sides every debate and also debate arguments we know aren't true for the sake of competition and having fun and fun. Additionally, our new affirmative, you have to give us a specific leeway because they have a huge end-round advantage. The anti-bias argument is especially important in here because they dominate the literature and they get prepared.
And that's a block.
Yeah. And I read it for like 9.
Yeah, you start.
Right. He needs it for 1 and all. So you have to go back to the process.
Do you reject all instances of labeling of mental illness?
No argument is that. Wait, but I mean, like we reject the label of mental illness. Yes.
You reject
In
the
every
label of
instance.
mental illness.
What do you mean?
Defend that labeling is bad.
We'll defend that labeling is bad, but I mean, like our counterplan taxes are advocacy, right? So that's.
I mean, are you advocating that labeling is always bad, or are you advocating that labeling?
What do you mean?
Is
What do you mean
bad
by
in this
advocating?
instance?
Do you mean like advocacy in
If
terms
we win
of
that
like
labeling
quote,
is
this
good,
judge,
hold on,
or do you mean like?
It's only this. If we win that labeling is good in some instances, are you going to say this doesn't matter because it's only about the counterplan?
Okay, I don't understand your argument.
Okay, if we make arguments about how labeling is good in instances, other instances, you will say things that aren't related to.
No, you have to win. Well, argument is simply that you have to win that your instance of labeling was a good idea. I mean,
if you're not rejecting other instances of labels, how do you like solve the impact here?
No, arguments that
like that is going to benefit because
this
instances of
counterplan
labels
itself
would still happen and
Our evidence, our Conrad evidence indicates that discursive representations are critical. Like our counterplan, like explicitly rejects the notion of mental illness in the context of year 1AC.
Okay, that's fine. You make a bunch of arguments about how Hooks doesn't actually assume that mental health care is what's necessary.
Hooks doesn't assume that the term mental illness must be tied to this care.
What?
Yeah.
But
I don't assume the distinction. I don't understand the distinction.
Well, fine. Mental health care is care for mental illness. Hooks says that's necessary, but Hooks' argument isn't that it's necessary because the term mental illness is necessary for
Did we say the term
movement.
mental illness in the 1AC?
Hooks says it's necessary because care is necessary. Like,
did we say the term mental illness in the 1AC?
Actually, the cross-sects of the 1AC did several times and defined things like a lack of self-esteem as a mental illness. That was like one of my last questions.
All right, that's fine. I mean, like, you think that she assumes that mental health care is not what's important? I don't understand.
No, I think the reason why she thinks that mental health care is important is because the care aspect of that is important.
The label mental health care and the label mental illness.
If you read the
cards... All right, are you making a distinction between the label mental health care...
Well, you didn't make that argument. We have cards about why they're the same. We'll argue that...
So they're the same.
That when they say, like...
So if they're the same, then when Hooks
health,
defends liberatory mental health care in the title chapter of her book.
Okay, the warrants why Hooks says that mental health care is necessary all are centered around the fact that they have to be alleviated of their problems in self-esteem. There is no argument why, like, attaching the term mental illness is critical to that care.
You just told me that the label mental health care and the label mental illness are
I
fundamentally
understand
the same thing. So why can't we justify our use of the word
Hooks
mental health care?
isn't attempting to respond to our criticism. That would be kind of like reading Hooks in the wrong way. Hooks isn't saying that the concept of mental illness is critical when you give this care.
Or just like mental in front of healthcare. She's just saying that you need some sort of
like
care.
when Hooks gives the warrants, it doesn't...
Like, none of your evidence is specific to Hooks, and like her title chapter is liberatory mental health care.
Hooks' evidence, when you look at the warrants that Hooks uses, it points out that she doesn't need that mental adjustment.
Do you need prep? Just one.
No, just where's the fixed block?
Here.
Okay. Yeah, you just have to read after the line as much as you want after that. Okay. No. Are you ready, otherwise?
Yeah.
Alright, he's ready.
49.
Sweet.
The counterplan. That's the PICS debate. What, PICS debate?
No. The PICS debate on the counterplan. Sorry, I didn't tell you all to leave more room.
I'm sorry.
Actually, put that on the bottom.
Very sorry. Fine, I'll put that on the bottom.
Yeah, that's going on the bottom.
So then it's Anwar first, overview, A-spec, topicality, and that critique. Then the counterplan.
You're the big thing last.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So Anwar does an overview, A-spec, topicality, picks. At the bottom. Okay.
Is there an overview on Anwar?
I don't have my Anwar book.
Overview is after Anwar.
Make sure he gets that down the bottom.
And we're not going first. Number 6, no impact. That says that if the MR won't be drilled because it's not economically viable, means there's never no drill. Also, cap plans also linked to no distinctions. If we see 1 year too late, because we couldn't read cards of the 2 armies, you can't reject. You have to reject all those arguments. A spec overview. Well, when specifying Asian critical negative ground, our evidence says 90% of the outcome of policy determined by how it's actually implemented. I want to see vagueness to eliminate 90% of ground by preventing us from running distance counter plans or solvency arguments. Then look at the other. There's bad for 2 reasons. One, we need this ground topic so broad. With sometimes treatment, so many cases are topical that we've learned jury structures to even have a chance to utterly destroy education on one topic, overly based over the act how policy are implemented. Or as important as the policy itself, the standard 97, we have to grow as much as about apologize, we do formal rules of priority guide or model the actually the brains thing as controlling about the process we use substance process matters every year a new rule comes about me in the NFB as important as what it says and agent specification critical policy based actors from 90%, that's Elmore. In 79, not self-issue analysis policy based terrorism matter very little bit mechanism for the legislation understood. And here's the question: what percent of the work achieving just our government actions done when the permanent illegal alternatives been identified? I don't say that's by the normal case of 10% leaves it rating. 90% of the realm implementation. Here's why when the rate on argument the average no offensive argument they need plan vagueness to win. They can be abuse of picks on picks bad arguments. The responsibility means that you lost me abuse of plans or Asian abuse arguments our ability to win. As it's really compromised because the game is rated against us. They get the only remedy is that I get a valid line and one says no residual basis, but. 1 is not topic violation argument specification critical education years solvency negative ground 2 the resolution says federal government to allow the affect flexibility in picking agent. It doesn't mean that they don't have to specify the arguments no different from the plan or will increase protection or private protection. It will increase mental health services like they do. And their plan takes might be all the rest of the demands, but it will be possible to debate and educational reasons for specifying how that's the 1 and C and the overview. Number 2, they say counter only USFG, but that makes no sense for no reason. The only reason why it's good is because of ground predictable that's turned back by all our offense. And if you want to see more specifically, agents critical ground, please we had a sweet counterplay, sweet score Supreme Court counterplay versus the app with an awesome self scars. Why Supreme Court is key to challenge master narratives. Also, we had a state spending versus federalism versus community about healthcare. To pause them on if we ran the court's counterplay. Also, we had decided to do funds affirmative that would apply depending on the agent that they would have run. Also, the topic is way too broad to not have these generic strategies. Mental healthcare is crucial to certain affirmative strange wording of the resolution means the potential for the potential of tons of new acts that we can never predict. Also. They have no office why specifying is bad. Even though those agent counterplans are bad, we still have the right to show them out in the 1 and C. Next they say not specifying English education, but 1 that they specifically the reason that it's a new act it means that we cannot research. We cannot research what is normal means. We can't research those things which we can never have any sort of spiritual strategy in the world of firm, which is their case. So we're talking about an in-round abuse in this specific instance is unique. Condition where we need these types of generic strategies. Also, the fact that the double research burden will destroy death because you have to look at what normal means and specific strategies. Also, the fact that this makes absolutely no sense. There's not just 1 normal means, otherwise the agent counterplans will make no sense because only 1 actor can do the plan. Next they said there's no right to it. There's no right to an agent counterplan, and that they don't lose any ground. But all the reason why we need agent counterplans above it's critical on ground, especially in the instance of a new affirmative. Also, the fact that the counter the second counterpretation says that you can that specifies beyond just USFG means they don't meet their first counterpretation. And a reasonable negative. Next they say that ace spec is worse because you can shift their agent, but then argument is that doesn't matter. We still have specific strategies. If you switch from comics to course, we can run the comic counterplan. And 7 means we still have those generic agent counterplan ground. Next they say that hyperspecificity is bad. 1 real model proves it's not infinitely aggressive. The federal government is a model standard, so it does not create a policy in Congress. The president's executive agency or the Supreme Court creates our standards based on education. The base should follow real world legislation as closely as possible. To our versus fair, you specify the international act, but we'll choose that fair grounds for reasonable interpretation. Don't punish us for 1 of the teams 2, 3 base specification good for burning ground. It gives them better defense against picks by defending exactly what literature advocates. And next they say that it leads to picks, but that's always answer on the counter limit. Some picks are okay. Also, that doesn't matter if it leads to picks because it's specific instance. Because the Asian counterplan picks is not no other picks that you would other deal with. Otherwise, we're winning reasons why Asian counterplans are good. That's all in the overview and all above. Also, there's no reason you don't like agent counterplays. Policy says you beat them on those particular arguments. And agent counterplays where represent negative ground, that's all above. Policy says also English education not making policy says bad arguments means they can't make them later. Next there's no ground loss, but our argument is that there is ground loss. So I'll explain next they cross checks vagueness, but look at version cross the 1 C. His only argument to anything was look at our 1 C, just read it. It's all in our tags. Next he says normal means, but the normal means is all answered above. They takes out all they also the fact that there's only 1 normal means would take out any of the shifting possibilities because they wouldn't have any solvency evidence for it. Topicality. Instead of one on potential abuse, but I'm articulating specific scenarios for in-round abuse. On the other flow, also potential abuse is in-round abuse. There's no warrant as to there's no warrant as to why we can run different things and how we can have a fundamental different strategy in this round means that because of the initial action of the 1 AC. Takes the weight on the count. Our class government says language now does more than represent reality. Also constitute challenging these labels for the policy will create an actual important policy difference. The concept we endorse discourse of these debaters are more important than individual proposals we recommend because we don't have the power to put the proposal in effect. Also, our counter says that the labels are no policy to change the way the society is holding some of those labels, even when the theory is good. For debate privileging discourse over actions still not waste and discourse is important socially. You shouldn't vote for a team that makes racist jokes regardless of the merits of the policy. They endorse our argument is that the mental health label has state causes. The affirmative should be accountable and it's not a voting show. Worse, reject the counterplan of the team. There's no abuse. To the affirmative is option. They get the entire 1 AC back. It's fair for them because the argument is that we shouldn't have been allowed to run the counterplan in the first place.
just have the block?
Yeah.
741.
Alright. You ordered A-spec. Overview at the top, just going down. I'm going to extend page of picks and answer his picks arguments there, because it's sort of like a different argument than on the counter plan. Is that alright, or is that going to totally fuck up your flow?
Sorry, fucked up.
Alright, sorry, fuck up. Now I'm just going to answer all the picks argument on A-spec and how it relates to A-spec. Then, sorry, Claire. Then, top value public health services. And then the counter plan.
So you going for picks normally, or you're just going for the context of A-spec?
Just in the context, just agent. I mean, this will all be just
And first, the overview on the counter plan.
yes, the overview is on the counter plan.
Straight down on the counter.
Straight
Okay,
down.
cool.
Everything is straight down. That's all it's straight.
Actually, but I need a timer to start. Yeah, sure.
Overview group demo evidence, terrible interpretation solves all the items, firm is not allowed to specify out of it, and will just defend the United States federal government, which means the negative is allowed to read the normal means of interpretation for mental health care function, which means that we're still debating the agents and that necessary for policy option engineer strategy still in proportion to defend the entirety of the federal government is proven in this round where we don't spike out of it in their politics arguments, and we still have an actor, that's the federal government. Their evidence isn't specific to what within the federal government actors key and resolutional integrity would outweigh this argument where I am. Extend to issue one, there's no resolutional basis. Plan text must be topical. Argument is that specifying makes you non-topical because resolution says United States federal government. If you can ignore the resolution, then it links to our specification argument, which is the offense for our interpretation. If we win our counter-interpretation that only U.S. federal government on the 2AC2 where I am now extended, it solves all their offense. That means the 2AC can never specify after the negative this, that's a negative is allowed to specify for us to be no means just a reason why we'd also use the Supreme Court, which means they can get their exclusionary picks, and if you were to specify, it destroys their offense because the firms would change their agent to avoid their sweet court's counterplan or their Congress counterplan, or they can specify below that to different justices or different people in executive agencies. It's proven by the college civil rights topic, and that's why FAD will be explained on the H picks beta. To AC number 3, not specifying is better for negative normal means of mental health care. There is no in-round abuse being spike out of anything, and you don't vote on A-spec in the semis of the TOC when we didn't spike out of anything. For the counter-interpretation, we still meet. It's a different counter-interpretation. We'll only go for one. The 2AR are not going for this one right now. 2-5 A-spec works with negative agent counterplan ground is not key. That would destroy education. That'll be below 2-6 type of specification. This is our offense, the counter-interpretation. If there's no resolution basis, you can have any individual agent within the federal government do your plan. That means you avoid every link because you can do things like agencies or delegation, etc. If it's about competing interpretations, we'll win because this means that their interpretation is flawed for these reasons, bad for education. If it's not about competing interpretations, we'll also win because there's no in-round abuse or reasons why they don't have links to anything. A-spec, now the agent picks debate group. Agent picks are bad because they destroy the plan and change the debate about the trivial net benefits like politics. They're bad for education because we don't debate about the mental health care topic. We debate about the ANWR topic every fucking year. And if they win, the picks are good. Agent picks are, even if they win, picks are good. Agent picks are different because they shift the debate away from the topic. They did not answer this argument, and only non-agent picks would, and only non-agent picks might be good. There's net benefits to agent picks are not germane, which means that outweighs their argument. There's no side bias because this topic is tiny. The affirmatives are terrible, except for ours, and add-ons don't answer agent picks. Their arguments are all specific to mental health care. They don't assume agent picks, and their language arguments don't matter. So reason to reject their interpretation, and we still saw we didn't say any of these arguments about cross-ex checks or no means, which takes out their argument. Public health service there is no in-round abuse. We didn't specify Bush League. We gave them all the ground. Counterplan overview group refers. The argument by doubles may be social specific, but they can be used cheap if you reject them. Then that causes atrocity as a centric have turned into easy. Their homosexuality. The analogy doesn't apply because our one sees contextualized by our firm. Their greed evidence indicates that psychotherapy can investigate the problem of societal oppression. They don't use the word cultural to modify self-esteem in the counterplan text. This is a flaw in their text. Means they don't have culturally based esteem training, which means that it would be conventional mental health care, and that links and means they don't solve because they don't by neither they don't solve because they don't do culturally based therapy, or the link to their own critique because people with self-esteem problems are same as people who are mentally ill, which means they label them or bracket them off the same. That means you would vote affirmative on the risk. Mental health care distribute the movement, and their discourse argument is not true. We have defensive calling upon the label. It doesn't turn the case. Labels keep to stop racism because that's the only thing that a movement can coalesce around. Their hook evidence is very listen. We don't justify electroshock therapy because we're contextualized admissions not inclusion. We don't have to defend the baggage that comes with mental health care. 2C1 mental health care is key. The Hooks evidence is phenomenal. Our evidence is so good it boggles the mind. Even if you were high, you would vote for us. Our 1AC Hooks evidence says it's a new revolutionary form of mental health care. It's more than just emotional. It's because people have to coalesce around the term. That's the only way they can get their movements off the ground. It's the only way they can avoid the categorization that exists in the status quo because they are black. Means we control the uniqueness. There's no categorization link are Montenegrins is phenomenal in the community social psychology can restructure the way movements generate alliances without destabilizing labels. The 2 and 3 permutations not seven, so we don't have to win this. It's a reason reject permutation. And I'm not going for it. It's just a do both permutation now. The 2 and 4 their evidence assumes institutionalized care. There's no reason why we justify worse atrocities, only mental health care. And solve and destroy all movements for change in current institutions. Cedric evidence indicates that there's societal guilt and genocidal mentality because we don't like the label of mental illness. We have to endorse mental health care too. To wage our guilt. That's key to solve this genocidal mentality. And there, and 2 and 6, the 2 and 7, the movements versus institutionalization equals guilt in society. Cedric can two evidence. So mental health care is good. And Cedric says they're key strategically after the reject lack of mental. So says that their rejection of labels is a link to psychological empiricism, which means they link back to every impact is read. 2 and number 9, 2 and number 8, and the hook 7 in case you have to use mental health care. 2 and 9, they can't solve the case. It's all explained. The overview about how they have a flaw in their text. 2 and 10, labels mentally are key. It's necessary to strategically use those labels. If you reject those labels, you destroy movements in this round. And here's more evidence. Is Usher 92. Diets stop compartment live phenomenon to see bad press, but new labels such with same stigma even more damaging. They in those process of labeling because they allow them to look forward and reform change labels. When you add more, so lead us to provide even the expert care for many. Practically claim jurisdiction over mental health care empowers a new breed of excellent intended marketplace matter pronounced particularly from master legal critical therapy sound empowering it further disempowers and objectifies, which means we have to stick with the current labels and make them better. Intuition 12, the mental health care is key. The hook 7 has new warrants about how it's key to the social change and dispositionality. I don't have to go for every one argument of see dispose, which means there's no offense on this argument. Basically, they do not solve the case because they wrote the camp plan text wrong, and even if they do, we have defense of mental illness.
Hey, were the cards that you say can like radicalize mental illness in the 2AC? And this could be the 2AC card. Did you read the blue on this? Orange. The A-spec, then I'm just going to go to the 2NC overview and make like my 2N overview there and answers arguments, so you don't need any sheet paper. There's a A-spec 2NC overview kind of button.
1 second.
Can I get another recording, dude? Turn set. Each pick he makes their warrants why the plan and why our pick is bad in this instance. For example, some of the arguments are that they have to shift the debate to mental health care and shift the debate to things that are relevant. Those arguments that he makes in the 2 and the 1 hour, which means that he can't cross-play this argument. And the 1 hour, he concedes all arguments in the limelight. For example, focusing the debate on mental health care is critical. That's the reason why our pick in this round is physically necessary. Additionally, he concedes our discourse arguments that the focus on discourse is critical. It's discourse shapes reality. He reads over this argument, those arguments, especially the affirmative side bias checks is a new affirmative, so you can't cross-play the pick's arguments now to the counterplan overview. Look, they have no offense whatsoever. They'll try to spin some offense, however, they concede all of our impacts over the arguments. First of all, they concede that all of our labels are self-fulfilling. The fact that they label people as mentally ill means that it'll be self-fulfilling. They'll be treated as demons in society, even if they and their characterization of INC don't necessarily want this to happen. It's what will probably happen after the plan is implemented. Additionally, that's our man evidence indicates that they justify worse atrocities. Additionally, they concede the argument that discourse shapes reality. Their argument for mental illness will be used in the legislative regime arena. That's our Conrad evidence. Additionally, they concede justifies worse in the references against them, and demobilizes social change now specifically as arguments. He says mental illness is a strategic use. However, there's no warrant why you have to use the term mental illness. The only warrant, the one he sees that you have to solve these people's self-esteem and try to mobilize movements. They say homosexuality is consensual. However, they concede the application to race the new label against people against racial minorities can be as being mentally deviant post the plan, which means it justifies their determination, even if that's not what they're actually advocating. They're running seats. What can possibly happen? Additionally, they talk about the plan, our account plan text, how culture does modify esteem. However, if you read our account plan text, it says culture modifies care. Yes, it says culturally based community care defines this care as a million care for self-esteem. So it's also additionally the next argument they make on the next part of the double bind is that we like because we treat them as essentially the same. No arguments that things like self-esteem are problems with living. These are not mental illnesses. Argument is that when you use the label of mental illness, it justifies worse atrocities against these people. They concede it's the root cause. It's the root cause of violent interventions. So when I see Saz and Conrad, which means that it outweighs the case in magnitude. Their only argument is racism and race that we solve in the capital. The next argument is that's now into the line by line. the Hoax evidence. Look, this Hoax evidence doesn't apply whatsoever. If you read the evidence of the round, Hoax is not trying to say that mental health care is necessary. She's not trying to say that the concept itself of mental health is necessary. She says that some type of care to address these people's emotional health problems is critical. It doesn't assume or alternative. As long as we provide some type of care that can alleviate the self-esteem problems that people are having, we will be able to solve. It doesn't say that the actual label itself is necessary. You can read the script. They just circle the words mental health. However, that's how the argument is trying to make whatsoever. There's no reason why that's uniquely necessary to mobilize around movements. They're not giving you a warrant. The fact that this Hoax evidence just circles it and says it proves that there's no warrant for this whatsoever. Number 4, evidence to say or evidence to talk about institutional care and that they bring to time for soul. This is not an offensive argument whatsoever. Additionally, our evidence indicates that the label of mental illness whatsoever is bad because it constructs reality. That's our Conrad evidence. It gives the power to define mental health professionals. That turns back to evidence that we on the bottom that says people can self-define. No, they can't. When you give the term mental illness to them, they can't self-define whatsoever. And additionally, the Tudor man evidence indicates that it justifies worse atrocities, it justifies worse forms of care, which is proven by the fact that the status quo is really, really racist. They can see this argument that it will not actually be able to lead to any such change. The society will still be racist, but it's slanderous truths. They're alternative until we co-opted. The number 7 evidence to say the statutory evidence says that psychology is imperative. Rejecting label is bad. However, this evidence does not say that whatsoever. It says it's just a piece of evidence that's written against institutionalization. It says that we need an alternative for these people. However, the alternative can also be the capital, and there's no more. The term mental illness is critical to mobilize any type of social movements. They have no offense whatsoever. The statutory evidence is not responsive in that form. Additionally, statutory will probably say that rejecting the term mental illness and the term mental illness is good, and also it will turn this argument against our one and T. Conrad evidence and Osas evidence that the reasons why these harsh reforms against mental ill people existed were because of the term mental illness. Now, the 8 and 9 evidence, the Hoax evidence, all answered above. He doesn't make any warrants. These are just tagline extensions. The number 7 evidence today. The level is critical. It's a strategic use. However, even if it's a strategic use in the context of 1C, can be applied in worse and worse forms. They have no offense. Why this is not true? Additionally, the T they make some uniqueness arguments. However, since discourse shapes reality, we can always fight back against those uniqueness arguments. Now, they read a piece of now read the last few arguments. He reads a piece of evidence. However, this evidence begs the question of whether mental illness exists or not. This evidence just says that you shift the label to another term. Our argument is that the label of mental illness is socially constructed itself. That you don't need a label for people with depressed. You don't need a label for them. There's just problems of living that they're going through. We don't shift the label to anything else because we don't classify them as deviants. That's all the plan does. We just say that they're normal people.
508.
I'm just treating it as the top of the counterpart.
You say you have an overview of your own?
Yes. There's 2 pieces of offense while we'll win this debate. The first piece of offense is we'll win a significant risk that counterplan can't solve any of the case. First, we'll win the defense that our Hoax evidence makes of why mental health care is necessary. Coalescing a movement for racial justice is uniquely better than any solvency evidence, which they don't actually read for their counterplan. Mental illness is necessary for the coalescence of the movement because conventional mental health care keeps down individuals who are categorized as minorities in our society. They're racist, domination, and institutions of white supremacy cause the internalization of depression and self-esteem issues, which blame individuals and encourage internalization of survival strategies, which cause internal racism. Our mental health care Hoax indicates that mental health care is key to isolating agency within individuals because the psychological wounds that they hold in the status quo and the way the current mental health care problems isolate them and put them away in institutions and treat them by giving them drugs and things like that. We'll win that giving them revolutionary new forms of community mental health care is more key to solving their psychological wounds, giving them agency and self-esteem to cause a movement for articulating oppression and recognizing the nature of the mental or internalization of what racism means in the society. We'll win that articulating that as a mental illness is necessary key. Additionally, we have strategic defenses of why labels are key to solving this debate. We'll win that it's necessary to stop genocide against the mentally ill because the guilt denial that society feels. Additionally, foregoing labels is bad. They can see this argument. Usher indicates that when we get rid of labels, that causes worse labels against people who are mentally ill, and that causes more discrimination against them. We have a defense of our discourse because they concede that there are people who have problems with living. We'll win that categorizing those people or calling things mental health care or
mental illness is necessary to wage demands and make changes to the current system. We'll control the uniqueness to these arguments because they're categorized within bad forms of mental health care and the status quo. We would get them into a new revolutionary kind of movement. Additionally, we'll have defense against all of their arguments. We're not a violent form of mental health care, and we have no warrant for why we justify violent atrocities. He just repeats this again and again in the 2-1R. We have specific reasons for why community care is more revolutionary and allows people to redeploy their own identities and resist racism. Additionally, they'll win if they can see the argument that if self-esteem is exactly the same thing as saying mental health, there's no link to the benefit because we're just treating self-esteem and it's the same thing as mental health. Or the counterpoint links because they would treat self-esteem also will win that waging a movement for mental health care is more beneficial than the overview debate.
Montenegro
and the Montenegro evidence answers all of his arguments about why we would categorize, homogenize, or oppress people in the overview debate. He said there's no offense, but this is all above. He said the impacts are always going to outweigh argument. He has no internal link in the 2-1R as to why we would justify worse atrocities. He just said this over and over again. He says labels are self-fulfilling, but there's still no warrant for this. If the discourse is the most important key in this round, our strategic use is the only advocacy that's been presented by the affirmative in this debate. You shouldn't vote on what we justify, but the way we have presented and framed the 1AC advocacy. They say we justify worse intervention, but Cedric will solve an internal link in this argument. The society feels a massive guilt towards because of the institutionalization of the people who are considered mentally ill and status quo that includes African Americans who have been categorized as depressed. That will cause a genocide to eliminate the things that make society feel guilty unless we provide new forms of mental health care. You can read this evidence after the debate. It's pretty amazing. It turns back all of their arguments. They can't solve any of the case because either they're not using mental health care or not treating self-esteem, and they can't solve any of the things that keep down a movement from forming to resist racial oppression of the status quo, or they do those things because then they link and the counterplan isn't competitive. They do not provide cultural care because they're just providing it within the current framework of mental health care. Either that or they just do cultural talking, which doesn't solve people's self-esteem problems. They say it's the root cause of all violence, but this doesn't make any sense. It doesn't articulate why this would be the case on our Montenegro evidence indicates that we allow people to resist that. Additionally, he says that the Hooks debate, he says that there's no, Hooks doesn't say that mental health care is necessarily key, but Hooks is trying to say that. Her argument is not that the minority should be categorized as deviant, but minorities should be categorized as individuals who have been oppressed by structures that cause them to internalize depression and things like racism. That's why the warrants are all above on the overview of Hooks. The chapter title of her book indicates that she thinks mental health care should be liberatory, and we should frame it in terms of that in order to start a necessary coalition. You can see in the Montenegro evidence, which indicates that community psychology is necessary to solve in creating an alliance because people can articulate their own identities within the framework of the community and resist the categorization. It destables the labels that they say we link to. Additionally, they just say that when we make the argument that all of their evidence assumes institutional care in the 1980s and 1970s. This is not the same thing as community care. You should defer to our later Montenegro evidence, which is comparative to the type of care we advocate. They say we would cause racism and society would still be racist, but that's not true. The movement that would become articulated and would happen after we advocate a new revolutionary mental health care would be able to resist those forms of oppression. The Hooks evidence is phenomenal on our question to be able to solve societal racism. The guilt denial. We don't have to when we solve all racism. It's always going to be that we solve better than the counterplan. The guilt denial debate, he says that Cedric assumes that institutions are bad, but this is not true. It assumes that stigmatization that the society feels for putting mentally ill in institutions and throws a stigma against the mentally ill. Cedric doesn't think that rejecting labels is good. He thinks that making transitional demands are good. He thinks that's on the number 10 debate. They would link to a psychological irredentism because they are necessarily resisting categorization of mentally ill, which causes them to be treated worse. Usher evidence provides a unique scenario for this. When we reject specific labels, that causes them to be labeled with other things. Technologization of illness is inevitable. It's better that we place strategic demands on the system. Otherwise, our movement for racial justice will never get off the ground.
The decision is 2-1 for the company from abstract.
I voted negative. I think this is very similar for me for y'all for what happened in the last debate, and I think your evidence is probably better, if not significantly better, than their evidence on a lot of these questions, but I think the way it's debated, particularly in the 2NC and to a lesser extent the 2NR, I think they're ahead on a couple of minor things that end up being fairly important. I think that the best arguments, I think that they are sort of controlling the issue of external offense, in that I think that they're probably winning these saws of countered evidence. One of those pieces of countered evidence I think is quite good, that indicates that the way in which ideas of mental illness, the ideas of there being a biological root to ways in which there's social misbehavior, those sorts of things, justify lots of other kinds of violence. And that is sort of the root of the reasons why violence can be deployed. I think that they win a pretty reasonable risk of those arguments. I think they're winning some inroads in that, the way in which you frame it in this debate can potentially change that. You don't necessarily have to be tied to that. It's more about institutional ones. I think you win some of those arguments, certainly, but I don't really think that there's a lot of external offense outside of just the question of whether or not your affirmative solves the problem it's supposed to solve. So I think that, and in the context of, I think the fact that the counterplan in the instance of this particular case, I think pretty much solves your app, and that I think that it deals with all of the problems in the context of the way that they're explaining this particular debate about racial politics and those sorts of things. I think that the best arguments you have, for me, are unfortunately the ones that the ones that don't get talked about as much. I don't think your card about guilt is particularly good, and I think the 2NR is fairly accurate in this depiction of this evidence as being just descriptive of the need to have an alternative that deals with the problem. And I think their alternative in the context of this debate is adequate to accomplish that. I think that establishing, community health care places where we can, be empathetic and talk about, recognize our own, issues of oppression in the context of each other, I think deal with the guilt in that context because it is a very concrete institutional form of change. And the other argument that I think you talk about a lot is the issue of the current mental health care system is pretty problematic and that you can sort of change that. I think that he's also fairly accurate in his description that there's not a whole lot, that the fact that the current mental health system is bad is just sort of a reason why I would want to vote negative, because it's just demonstrable of the reason why it's problematic is not because of the fact that it hasn't included these sorts of issues. It's just the more fundamental problem that it justifies the deployment and use of violence against people who we think are other. I think that the pieces of evidence that you have that I find to be particularly good in the arguments that I think are good, I think there's one of those pieces of Cedric evidence, not the one that's got guilt, the other one. The printed out one. I think that piece of evidence is quite good on the point of it being necessary to, the labeling helps generate sort of a movement that deals with the issues that are problematic for people. The problem is that I don't really know why it's important that we have a health care sort of psychiatric, some movement that addresses these sorts of problems. Because the only reason why that's important in this particular debate is because it allows us to deal with the problems of white America, and I think their counterplan solves that problem. I think you probably win that the way that you deploy the issue of mental illness is important to generate a social movement that is able to deal with it in other issues, but I'm not positive what the end impact of that is, why that's critical. And I think that if you, I think this is an extremely close debate, and I think if you sit on that for, even just like 10 or 15 seconds in any of those speeches, just sort of like draw out like some other reasons why it can be useful, even if you just frame it in the context of, they said root of all violence, well, they certainly can't solve if they cement the way in which we exclude people, stuff like that, in every area except for maybe this one, just sort of to get at it in the same way that they get at it. And I think the piece of Usher evidence also is very much the same for me, that I think that it's very good that if we don't have a label, then we'll sort of just try and find another label, and that will empower more experts. But the example that's used in that piece of evidence, I don't think is applicable in the context of their criticism. Because the example of that is when we changed it from mental illness to mental health care, and the way in which there were a large number of people who were able to say, well, I wasn't an expert about mental illness, but I can be an expert in mental health care. So it allowed more experts to come in and, do their terrible things that they do. But I think that their alternative and their conception of what we should do is to just reject in totality the idea that there can be experts on this question. I think you all should frame that more clearly, because I think your evidence is pretty clear on that point, but there's just not a whole lot of debate on this question. I think you should just say, and you do say this in the 2NR, you say that this begs the question of the idea that, that there's anything to treat in the first place. And the point of our argument is that there just isn't anything that should be treated or approached based on those sort of conceptions. So I think that you're winning a pretty decent risk of these arguments, but I'm just ultimately left unclear as to exactly what I should do with them. The thing that I, for a long time, for most of my decision, was thinking would probably put you over the top, is I think these focus cards, I think that you all are basically totally right in your description of them. And it really is just like Hooks, uses mental health care, but really just means care is important. I think that there is places in this evidence, in these pieces of evidence, where you could draw out some more distinctions that would make it a little bit more clear as to why it is useful to describe it as mental health care. And I think it sort of ties in with the guilt argument. It's sort of just the past argument, and it's just sort of the historical progression of And even also in the context of like that Montenegro card, just that it's useful to not in entirety toss out systems of ways in which people have been oppressed because they just have a usefulness in this context. And I think it would be useful if y'all just read a card, just like a Butler or Campbell or whoever card that's just like words being reappropriated. I think if you have that piece of evidence, these folks' arguments become much, much stronger. And even if you don't have that piece of evidence, just explain them a little bit more in that context. I think that would be definitely be enough to put you over the top for me, because I don't think in the end the negative wins a whole lot of their arguments. I just think that the alternative solves more or less all of the critical things you articulate as being offensive arguments, and I think that they have a minor, although not particularly large, but definitely coherent explanation as to why the way in which the words get deployed in this particular debate, the discursive effects of that would be to cement the idea that experts have some authority to discuss these issues.
External effects.
Yep.
Theory external effects like mental health care movements, like say they solve forced institutionalization and that kills Black people, then that
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Definitely.
Well, I want to say one thing. I thought that you all debated very, very well in this debate. I thought that you're in a tough situation, you're debating a new act, and I thought the one thing you maybe did the best job on was kind of doing something that would be difficult to do if I was in your shoes, which is to kind of just call bullshit on the Hook's evidence being kind of smoke and mirrors on the label question. I thought that was a very competent and aggressive thing to do, and I thought you were right about that, and I agree with Charles. I do think that ultimately the Hook's evidence helps them in some ways that are more complicated that I'm going to talk about, but I did want to commend you all on debating very well. I've essentially voted on try or die on the question of whether or not we can do anything as it relates to the case. I think that the kind of macro level flaw in the negative approach is to really pound home the notion that the label is bad, as opposed to pound home what we're going to do about the label and the effects that it has. Their argument is to agree, with their Sedgwick evidence and whatnot, that the label is awful right now. But their argument is to say that really two things. First of all, is that the label of mental illness or mental health or whatever can be redeployed in positive ways. And then to also use that Usher card that they read to say that moving away by just renaming a new label, which is, I think, a fairly accurate characterization of the counterplan, does not escape the criticisms of the label that exists. And initially I read that card and thought it was highly theoretical, but it was actually pretty specific to healthcare. So I guess I don't really think that the counterplan moves society away from the flaws which exist as it relates to stigmatization and medicalization very well. And while I definitely have concerns, as per all of the Conrad, some of which was very good, and Zah's evidence that you read, that the label can be deployed effectively, I think that it might be. I mean, their Sedgwick card, I saved it to quote my oral critique. I thought it was just fantastic. Nothing in my argument confirms the technologizing of illness, and the bulk of your arguments are about medicalization. We do not need to technologize illness beyond the point at which it's helpful to do so. It goes on to say that, quoting Zaz specifically, that public psychiatry has become unpopular now with the public. Middle-class America forms a solution to this. Possible pressure groups could exist. And the unpopularity of psychiatry is an important factor which crystallizes a vocal and determined lobby for the provision of psychiatric facilities. It just seems to me that that your solution, which is to be deathly frightened of the label, ignores the fact that the stigma will totally continue to exist. One important moment is the cross-sex of the 2NC, where you do say that the counterplan is not a critique alternative to end all medicalization or to end all labeling, but rather to do so in the instance of the app. So I think that there will be people, there will be African Americans who have, mental illness or mental health issues, or think that they do, even if Zaz is right, and nothing will be done about that situation. And I think moving away from that label doesn't remedy the situation. Sticking with it at least might. And there seems to be no solution to any of the case or in the world of your alternative. I just think the stigmatization gets kind of driven underground and changed around. and that essentially they defended ID politics in the context of mental illness, that we should have that word and that term of art to break down its stigma and to move away from it. And their Sedgwick evidence is just so excellent and on point. And I know you indicted it on point in the 2NR, and your indict really only amounted to saying your labeling argument turns it, which is just not factually right. This is a pretty healthy defense of labels in that context. The other thing I want to make 5 other comments. One is that I thought you were right that the Hooks evidence really doesn't assume labels, but the Hooks evidence is still relevant because the impact to why labeling needs to continue is because an abandonment of it means that we wouldn't support public resources and financial support for mental health care, which does reaccess all the cases. Does that make sense? So even if you're right and the counter plan does what Hooks is calling for, because Hooks is not really talking about the label of mental illness, the Hooks evidence does say that we are doomed to a racist, exterminated America in a world where we don't provide services to African American along the lines of the plan. Does that make sense? And this card says that that's exactly what would get tanked in a world where we lose our label. And I don't think the counterplan remedies that, because your whole internal link is that the use of the label in one instance legitimizes its use, period. Does that make sense? So I think that they won, that it was good to legitimize the use of it, period, because it would stand to avoid a world under which we would stop providing public health resources and risk the horrors of the substantive component of the Hooks argument. I think your impact work is poor. This is where I disagree with Charles. I think that medicalization is probably bad, but again, in this debate, you don't read an impact of like the state, which is a big part of your argument, whether or not mental health professionals, anything that's on par of the size of the case. Does that make sense? I thought that you were very good at questioning whether or not your label arguments turned their case, but the external things that they also propped up, which you said were the root cause of the case, didn't have an external impact of their own, state, medicalization, etc., that were very sizable. And I didn't think that you controlled the vital internal link to the case because I thought we were doomed, and that the only shot was to give it a try, to stick with the labels. I think that maybe you should consider having the counterclaim or an alternative to the K maybe function as a broader change. That might have gotten you somewhere in this debate. Does that make sense? Because I do think you ultimately lose on uniqueness. And maybe if I haven't said that enough in this oral critique, I should be crystal clear about that. I mean, I agree with a lot of what Charles said, but the problem is there's no solution to the racist, medicalized world that exists right now. And the counterplan is, one attempt to remedy one thing. And the Sedgwick card and it doesn't accomplish that. And the Sedgwick card says that the use of those labels does stand to break down a broader change. So in a weird way, they could access more of a solution to the uniqueness problems that existed than the negative could. Does that make sense? The last comment I want to make is that you did win discourse first, but your only answer to the uniqueness, I don't think you won that discourse was first in the classic sense of the word, critiques circa 1995. I don't think you won that everyone in this room who heard the use of the word mental illness will walk out of the room with a different understanding of mental illness, and that's more important than the substantive impacts of the case. Instead, I think you won that the discourse of labels creates a reality in society. Does that make sense? And that reality that it creates in society is either good or bad, and they won an internal link turn that it at least was the best shot we had to remedy the problems that you cited. Does that make sense? So if you wanted this for me to be an argument that was the people in this room shouldn't hear the word mental illness, dirty word, does that make sense? Then you needed to just kind of advance that in a different manner than you did. And oddly, this is relevant to all the uniqueness arguments I'm talking about, because when you answered, and the only time you did answer kind of their uniqueness triad thesis in the 1AR, which is that the world is totally screwed, racist, and medicalized, you said, our discourse creates reality arguments, get us out of all that. Well, no. I mean, if the discourse that they create, which is a label, and they win that it's a solution, does that make sense? Then they can win, they can concede that their label does create a reality, and that reality is a better remedy for the problems that are at hand than what appears to be no solution to the problems at hand. So that's basically what I thought. I essentially thought that they defended the use of the label in the context of your offensive arguments, and that it was a better solution than you had for the problems at hand.
I decided to debate a little differently. I think that they wind up winning that the way that their affirmative functions, like the way that their use of the word mental illness functions, contextualized with the fact that they do community-based mental health care is distinct from what your impacts are talking about with regards to institutions that do very specific forms of violence against people. So I think that your Conrad arguments, which talk about how when you use the phrase mental illness, that lends credibility to mental health institutions, winds up getting internal links turned because it doesn't cause people to flock to shock therapy. It causes people to flock to community-based health solutions, whereupon they're more able to receive treatment. And I think that their Sedgwick evidence is really good, saying that your counterplan doesn't capture the community-based impacts that they have because you don't cause people to perceive mental health institutions with the same credibility or the same reversibility of the way that they are right now. Like you kind of give up on the idea that mental health care can be effective, which means that you link to their arguments about how community mental health care is important because it allows people to self-recognize and it creates a movement. And that's also how I think that they access their Hooks impact, even though you're right about the fact that they don't explicitly talk about a distinction between mental health care and just general health. I think they access those because I think less people wind up seeking treatment in the world of the counterplan. And moreover, I think that, I also think that the Cosgrove card actually kind of hurts you in this debate because it says what you want to win is that the counterplan and the plan function in totally indistinct ways, that they wind up with the exact same result. But your Cosgrove card says that the result of changing the language of legislation, you also have a Conrad card that talks about this, results in very, very different policy outcomes. So I don't think you wind up winning that your counterplan has the exact same format and result, and it operates under the same rubric as the affirmative does. And furthermore, I think that the Usher card helps them a lot because it really does provide like a totalizing comparison that's focusing on the labeling and saying we can resolve the problems with healthcare systems by just changing the way we name things. It's a fatalistic approach to healthcare that gives up on the possibility of it being reinvented. And the way I envision that working is that the reinvention of healthcare or mental health care is community-based mental health care that allows them to access their solvency vis-a-vis. Oh, and then one other thing I wanted to add is that I don't think that your impact to this critique is as compelling as the affirmative impact because you have this Rosenberg evidence that says that they don't solve because it causes recreation. It's actually sort of very generic. And your Conrad evidence that talks about extermination says that when we blame the individual, that allows us to just say things like Hitler was crazy and that's why he exterminated people, but we don't actually explore the real physical reasons why we go about killing people. Whereas their evidence talks about how we need to actually address the ways in which institutions harm people in the status quo and move away from those through community-based solutions. You understand that?
Yeah.
But I also want to echo what Will said, that I thought that you did a fantastic job against the new affirmative on this debate. It was really, really close, and you were very gutsy at times. And I thought you just debated extremely well.
Questions?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have a quick question. Sorry. Did I overcover the
I think the two and I definitely made the right decision.
Could I have gotten this